everybody. We are back today with Mak of Mak Jagger Tarot. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, in this conversation that we're going to have, we're going to be talking about ethics, which sounds much heavy. It's a heavy topic. We're going to make it lighter because we just will.
Sure.
But it is, even though we might try to make it lighter, it is an important topic. It is a heavier topic. And it's
Yeah.
a thing that doesn't get talked about very much.
Weirdly, it does not. It's very much ignored, I would say, because it doesn't have to be, I guess. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be talked about,
Yeah, it doesn't have to,
technically.
but in what we do, in the kind of work that we do, my astrology work and even some tarot work, your tarot work and Akashic records and all,
Yeah.
people come to people like you and I and other people that do what we do for guidance. And there should, to not discuss the ethics of that and how to ethically conduct oneself. It does seem kind of crazy to me that there aren't more people that talk about this.
Yeah, I know that there are people that are talking about it. And I think those are people that I have tons of respect for. I remember early in my career, the astrologer Jessica Lanyadoo is still very much a role model to me, but I remember her having lots of discussions about this on her podcast and having like whole episodes dedicated to this topic. And I think that like that is something that like a lot of the elders in the community have taken upon themselves to, and I'm not trying to say that Jessica's like, old or anything, but she's certainly been in practice, I think, since the late 90s and has had a lot of experience. And I really, found that to be super important for like my development in my own ethical standards, because really it is so individualized.
It is.
Because it has to be, because there is no larger governing body. I'm sorry, I have a kitten and she's biting my foot. But I think that's something that like now, this was like 5-6 years ago when I was just like starting my business. Now with like the explosion of like witch talk and all the shit that's happening over there, which I'm not a TikTok person, so it's kind of like I'm gonna sound like an elder we're talking about it, but I think that there's just so much, it's become a real swampy situation, in my opinion. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's sort of the way I see it.
I don't fuck with TikTok.
Me either. Me either. And I think there's a lot of I don't want to like sidebar too hard into this, but I do feel like for me, there's a little bit of like not needing to, you know what I mean? Like I just, that's not where I think my primary audience is. I just don't have the desire to involve myself with it. But I do think that like it should be a part of this larger conversation, simply because there is so much happening there. And I think we kind of touched on this really briefly in our previous video with Brandy, but like a lot of work that sometimes we have to do is undoing the sort of programming that gets put into people by people that don't necessarily have the qualifications in the background to be putting this stuff out there in the way that they are presenting it. So I think there's just certainly, especially, and I know this is something we kind of want to get into at some point, but with the eclipses and the retrograde, being Mercury retrograde right now, and the eclipses in the midst of those, the amount of like fear mongering that goes into like regular astrological phenomenon is so I don't know, it's problematic, I would say.
It is problematic. And, there are people, I think the people could do this for a lot of different reasons. The fear mongering thing. It could be that they don't know any better. And in that case, perhaps shut their mouth.
Yes.
And also, I think it's possible that some people do it to attract clients.
Yeah, I'm sure people have a range of motivations, and I'm sure that there's a segment of the population that actually thinks they're helping by espousing this information. And like, it would be disingenuous to not acknowledge the level of frustration, that can come along with these transits, or the weird vibes. I mean, I literally right before we did this was just posting about the weird vibes,
Yeah.
but then I was also quoting another astrologer that was like speaking about like the retrograde as like the RX shortening. The RX abbreviation is like, you know, pointing out that it's a medicine. And like, I think that there are a lot of, you know, obviously really qualified people out here talking about this. There's a lot of voices, you know, there's a lot of voices in the sarcophony of conversation happening right now. And I think, you know, one of the things that like comes along with the ethics piece is also the discernment piece, and like where in the do the two meet in our work, you know what I mean? Because we don't have these larger governing bodies, there's a larger burden on the client to do their due diligence and their research, because there is now such a saturated pool of practitioners, and only so many of them have credentials. I think, you know, from just even looking from like when I started my business in 2017 to now, how incredibly different the landscape has changed. Forgive me if I said for not knowing this, and I'm sure that maybe your audience has already knows this, but how long have you been a practicing astrologer?
I don't know that my audience does actually. Some people do, I'm sure. But okay, so I started the wheels turning for my business in June of 2018,
Okay.
and I opened it in, well, okay, so I got my first paying client in November of 2018, but I didn't actually get my website set up, which is when I consider to be like the start of my business, until
Got
December
it.
of 2018.
Okay.
But so December of 2018, sorry, that was like a too long, didn't read answer.
No, I think that's fair. It's complicated.
But I had been,
Because there is no governing body to say this is when your business opened. It's complicated.
yeah, so December 2018, but I have been a student of it since I was like 10.
Right.
I'm 36
Right.
now. So it's been in my life for, you know, for a long time.
And we're roughly on the same trajectory. I was about 12 when I first began my tarot practice. And then I started my business in late 2017, began taking my first paying clients in early 2018, like very early 2018. So that was really similar trajectories and timelines, which I think, you know, probably has a lot to do with us maybe just being the same age, or, you know, but I think we both have this interesting perspective of like, we weren't the first people by any means at all to like come into this profession, but we certainly were here before it became what it is today.
Yes. And I think, and you know, I think some of what it has become today, you know, I started noticing this shift quite a bit during the lockdowns.
Yes. Yeah,
And
and I will say that my business took off significantly. I was already full-time at that point, but I was barely making it. And then the lockdowns came, and I went from barely making it to like my first $100,000 a year. So there was a huge shift.
and I remember being, yeah, there was a big shift for me as well. And I remember thinking when everything locked down, I remember thinking, oh fuck. Like I remember having this thought of, oh fuck, people
Oh yeah.
working. This is this may not be good. I like this logical, and it actually ended up being not a bad thing.
No, it was this really that there was I remember that very like almost day to day being like, okay, this is fine, this is fine, okay, this is okay, this is good, this is really good, okay, holy shit, this is like I'm booked out for 3 months. Like, and it was really like, I would say within a 30-45 day period, my entire business changed drastically. And it was kind of head spinning for me to like go through this process of sort of just like figuring out what the fuck I'm doing, to like being in Forbes magazine, which happened to me, you know, I think May of that year, June of that year, for having like an immense successful like business success, kind of overnight business success in the field of witchcraft. So it was a really like crazy moment in my career. And I'm so grateful that I had people like Jessica Lanyadoo putting this information out in the year or a couple years before all this happened to me, because that was always sort of in the back of my mind of like, how do I create sustainability in this business? How, because I don't want to just like have one-off clients. Like I want to build a sustainable business and build client relationships. And you can't really do that without that trust, like without that ability to like that credibility. And so I'm super grateful that I had that background and I had experienced community members speaking publicly about these things so that I could then quickly integrate that into my business. Because if I didn't have that, I don't know how I would have handled like this explosion. So I'm wondering about like, I've never gone viral on social media, probably won't ever go viral on social media. It's just not a priority of mine, but I wonder what hell that happens to people. You know what I mean? Like when they do experience things like that.
Yeah, I'm not yeah, I don't know. Myself, I never have either. And it like you said, it's never been really a priority of mine either.
Yeah, I think that's the lure of TikTok though, is that people sometimes do go from just like whatever their regular lives to like influencer status overnight with things. And that's just sort of the way our culture exists now. And I think that really does impact who people see as credible in these spaces, because just because someone has a large audience doesn't necessarily mean they know what the fuck they're talking about. And I would
It's
say
all flashy and for show, but there's no substance.
exactly, like I don't
Mm.
know how many people that are like big into like social media astrology even know the names of like Chris Brennan, Anne Ortley, the the people that like fundamentally like developed astrology in the modern era to this day. I mean, people know like the Chani Nicholases of the world, but like the real behind the scenes astrologers that have been building this industry since some people since the 80s, 90s, even obviously even before that. Obviously, there's been, you know, legacy astrologers that are still practicing, people like Susan Miller, who again kind of have this flashy name and gets sort of like always sort of quoted in things. And I'm not saying that Susan Miller is like my favorite or anything, but she's an OG. She's been around for a long time. And it's like, do people, I don't know, like where are you getting your wisdom from when you're sitting here talking about this stuff? And I guess obviously that comes back to like something we hinted at in our last conversation, which is like the difference between pop astrology and like the astrology that like you actually practice with clients, and where the meeting point is.
Yeah. You know, you bring up something interesting just to deviate for just a second about
Yeah,
TikTok
of course.
going viral. Okay. I don't I wonder how much shit on TikTok is even fucking real.
You know, maybe we aren't the most qualified people to talk about this particular subject in general, just because neither of
Yeah.
us, I think, seemingly spend a lot of time in that
No.
space. I would say, you know,
And the reason I don't mean to interrupt you, but the reason that
no.
I am not qualified at all really to talk about this, right? But I did make a TikTok, never did anything with it. And I noticed that I started getting these fucking followers. I'd never done anything with it though. And I'm like, who the fuck are
Yeah.
these people and where are they coming from? I mean, I literally never put anything up. I never advertised that I had one and I never did anything with it. And that made me think, are these followers on this platform even real?
Well, I think that there's probably some element of that. Well, and I think this speaks to something interesting too, because it's like obviously the TikTok conversation is made more interesting by the United States interest in banning it, and that being sort of a hot topic right now. And like the real possibility is like that could happen. Like they seem very serious about this. And there's a lot of, I think, varying opinions as to like should they not. I obviously, well, maybe this isn't obvious, but I'm going to make a stand and saying I don't think they should, because I do think the United States interest in doing that is very muddy. But I think that there's a lot of people disseminating information on TikTok, not necessarily about astrology, but like about politics and about what's happening in Gaza and about things that people aren't getting information about any other way because the news media isn't reporting on it. So I do think that there's like a larger conversation here about like the validity of what's being shared on TikTok, which I would have to say probably comes back to the other meeting point of this, which is discernment, and the discernment of the people who are receiving this information. And of course, you know, a lot of the audience that TikTok caters to is young, it does are still developing their, quite literally, their brains, and so their discernment is of course not going to be what a 36-year-old person's going to be. But then also there's the other side of the spectrum, which is like, to bring the Facebook about it all, Facebook's primarily used by people 50 plus, and the discernment level in there is a fucking mess too. So I think I don't know, for me this maybe comes back to like a point that I think we talked about in our last session, which is like, there is to some degree a lid for every pot.
Yeah.
And the people that are going to be gravitating towards our work are probably not the people that are going to be consuming bullshit pop astrology and like generic tarot readings on social media. At least not like with any sort of real seriousness. They might like sometimes like kind of glance at it, or like kind of like it might like be something that they're on some level taking into their consciousness. But I don't think that those are necessarily the types of clients that either of us are trying to gravitate toward us. And also probably to some level there's always going to be varying levels of, I don't want to say intellect, but you know what I mean, like varying levels of like,
Well, yes, no, I know what you mean, and varying levels of like interest, even,
yes,
um,
yes.
yeah, and last time in the last video that we did with Brandy, I kind of ragged, I kind of went on a short little tirade about pop astrology, and I want to.
And I think it was valid.
It is valid, and I stand by what I said, but I also wanted, and I don't think I said this. The one good thing about pop astrology, the one good thing is that it can get people curious,
Yes.
or pop tarot, right? It gets people curious to want to go.
Yeah.
And I didn't say that, and I should have added that in there, because that is one good thing. If it can spark some curiosity, some intrigue in somebody's mind and people's minds to learn deeper, to want to know more, then I think it's great. But I think that
Yeah, me too.
I still stand by everything else I said about it being
I am in complete agreement with you 100%. And I think that that kind of like extends to like the lid for every pot situation of like, for some people that is going to be enough to satiate them. For some people, they're going to be like, no, I really want actually someone to read for me specifically. I want to understand like more about my birth chart. I want to understand more about like what's going on in truly for me. And I think, people with the amount of discernment who are willing to also seek out practitioners like you and I who, are not going to be the most, inexpensive practitioners available to you by any stretch. People are going to take that level of concern and investment, of course, are going to be more interested than someone who's just sort of swiping by and like getting something fed to them through an algorithm. But I do think that, yeah, that entry point is really helpful, especially for me, particularly because my business is primarily sustained not as much through one-on-one clients, but through larger event work. And larger event work is absolutely predicated on the interest generated by these people that are out here doing it for, I don't know, I don't know what motivates people to do this work. I'm sure some people are motivated by, the potential that virality can bring in terms of like being able to sustain themselves financially. I'm sure some people are doing it for attention. Some people are doing it, I'm sure everyone's motivated by different things. But the thing is, I don't really care, because at the end of the day, I'm the one making the money from Meta. I'm the one making the money from this random group of lawyers that is coming to town and wants to do something fun. Like that's it's coming in my checkbook, not theirs. So thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
But I think kind of to come back to like our original conversation, I would love to circle back and like hear your thoughts on like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I have a kitten and she's crazy. Please forgive me, everybody.
It's okay.
Tammy, you gotta stop. Tammy, that's not for you. Oh my goodness. So perfect segue, I think, into what I wanted to bring back up, which was Mercury retrograde and the chaotic vibes of eclipses, which, a lot of people, I'm sure, are capitalizing right now
Yeah.
on the confusion, the fear, the excitement, especially right now with the eclipses happening on the 8th,
Yeah. Let me
which
throw
people
this.
are watching in time and space.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was gonna throw out. I didn't realize we had to put the date here in this. We're filming this on April 4th of
Yes,
2024. So the eclipse, the solar eclipse in Aries, will take place on the 8th.
the big one that everyone's hoopla on about.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So I just I think this is a timely discussion for that reason. Although I think if you're watching this in another time and space, it's probably relevant for your own reasons.
Yeah.
Don't quit watching if you're vibing with us. But yeah, I wonder. Yeah, what are your thoughts on the way that it's being presented from like the things that you're seeing are being fed to you on your personal algorithms, or like what you're, what your vibe, what you're feeling?
Well, like you mentioned, eclipses, there's weird energy, right? Like there is. And I'm not gonna bullshit people and be like, it's all totally great. And wonderful. I'm not gonna
100%. Yeah.
I'm not gonna do that because they'll look at me and be like, she's full of shit, you know. But I mean, there is weird energy. Eclipses do produce weird energy. Mercury retrogrades, which Mercury is retrograde right now, just turned retrograde. Mercury retrogrades can fuck with technology. They can fuck with communication. These can happen, but I do think there is this overblown Mercury retrograde thing that goes on in this space where it's like everybody needs to go, feels like they've got to like they're gonna piss themselves about how scared they are about it.
Right.
And it's
Yes.
like, no.
And it has absolutely saturated to the point that it is one of the most, I think, household name transits that there is, if not maybe the most
Mhm.
household name. So, the hoopla around the eclipses is obviously bigger than just the astrology world. Like my father is talking to me about eclipses, and for the level of interest that he's never had in my career before. So it's like there's obviously an extension beyond just our little bubble of the universe with that. But like the Mercury retrograde of it all, I think I mentioned this previously, but I did have last Mercury retrograde, I did have a group of like pretty high level executive team of a very well-known company hire me to come in and do a 45-minute lecture on Mercury retrograde and how to work with it. Completely serious, how to work with it, how to not be fearful of it. I literally taught a lecture called Don't Fear the Retrograde, and they were all really grateful because they had been noticing the impact, because obviously Mercury does impact communication and technology. So
Yeah.
of course it is going to impact people in a noticeable way, and then they're going to like draw those conclusions and then suddenly, make it this thing. So I think it's just understandable why it has grown in such a like a topic of conversation, but it certainly is exploited, I think, by many, many, many practitioners on the pop side of things to be able to, I don't know, get people to give them money, pay attention, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're either, it could be trying to obtain clients, get money, just doing it to for attention whoring reasons. Who knows?
Right. And let's not be disingenuous. Neither of us are doing this I mean, we do it because we like it. We also have bills to pay, so it's not like we don't want to take clients' money too, but the ethics of it.
Absolutely. But there is, I mean, like this is actually something that the ethics of that even like,
Yeah.
while I certainly do have bills to pay, I've got a son that I'm raising, all of his shit is behind me. Everybody knows he exists. Y'all haven't seen him, but y'all know he exists. There is a money thing, but there's also a helping thing for me.
Yeah.
Like and if I ever felt, and this is just for me personally, if I ever felt like the helping was being eclipsed, no pun intended, by the money thing, I might have to sit with myself and think about if I'm in the right line of work.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid and very honest and very brave thing to say. And I think, and I would think that I would hope that anyone who's impacting the lives of people directly, whether they're in our line of work or whether they are in something more like regulated, like medicine, for instance, and I'm not comparing the two, but like, I'm just saying, like, anybody who's impacting the lives of clients directly, I would hope that they would also sort of be running that same basic programming of like, why am I in this field and what's motivating me to show up every day. And I'm pretty transparent. I think this is one of my favorite boundaries. Money is one of my favorite boundaries in the work that I have. So I'm pretty transparent that as much as I enjoy doing the work and it is fun for me, and I do get a lot of personal enrichment and fulfillment out of it, it is 1,000% a job.
Yes,
I would not do it for free. If I had the option to do nothing, 1,000% sign me up. I would do nothing because I have ADHD and autism. I am barely functional as a person. So like, I'm very fortunate that all I have, like, that this is what I can do to make money and I can sustain myself. But if I could lie around in my own filth for the rest of my life and just get up to feed my cats, yes, God, like, yes. Sign me up. Where do I get to? Yes. And that's just the truth. I'm really fortunate to be able to do this work. I'm grateful that I get to be able to help people. That is certainly a perk, but I consider this a career, and it is something that I'm doing for work. And I think for me, that is how I stay on the right side of my ethics without breaching too much personal
Yep.
involvement. Does that make sense? And I want to be clear, I do read for friends and family. Usually, like yesterday, a friend came in. Did she pay a discounted rate? Absolutely, but she still paid, and I treated it exactly like I would treat any other client. And I think that like I have to keep those lines really clear. And so for me, the money is absolutely the boundary. So I am very transparent. Do I do this for money? 100%, but I also like it too.
Yeah.
And I think that's just how I feel about it.
You bring up something interesting about money being a boundary. There are actually a couple things that you just touched on that I want to touch on. The thing about, I want to touch on also reading for people that you know in just a second, like the ethics of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But
We'll circle back to that.
the money being a boundary thing, I started noticing that I would get these, once I started making YouTube videos, I started noticing that I would get these people that would email. They didn't want me to read for them.
Yeah.
I didn't quite know what they wanted. It seemed like they wanted me to be a dumpster for all their shit.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, like, I'm not really sure what this is, what you're wanting from me exactly. There are also some people that this part hasn't happened in a minute, but that would reach out like, thinking I'm attractive or whatever, and sending
Yeah.
emails, and it's, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, okay. So we're gonna put a fucking boundary up here. So I
Yeah.
made a service on my website, and it's kind of a joke, right? It's kind of part joke, but it is actually a boundary. It's a pen pal service where if you want me to be the receptacle for your shit, but you don't want me to read for you, or you want to whatever no, you're gonna pay me for that.
Yes, exactly. I have something similar. It's called What's Your Fucking Problem? It's an advice column, and I will sometimes answer, but I answer publicly in my email. So I answer for free, but it goes in my newsletter. So it becomes free marketing for me. And that's how I go about that too. So it's similar in that vein. Which if you want, write in, ask Mac. You can find it on my website. If you got a fucking problem, I get my advice. I call it free advice from an expensive witch. And I do give people the opportunity, if I publish your letter, you can get 20% off of a reading with me. But yeah, I'm going to publish your letter, of course, anonymously. I'm not going to put your information out there. I'll give you like a code name, but that's how I go about doing that. And I think it's a kind of similar vibe and idea, to be able to like take that portion of society that just wants our attention, our energy, whatever, and like make it work for us.
Yeah, because because yeah, I found that had to, and this is also decent advice for anybody else who does what we do and maybe doesn't have something like this and finds that they get a lot of people doing stuff, like what I'm talking about, what you're talking about. It is good advice to have a boundary like that in place.
Yeah.
Something I mean, opinions are like assholes, right? But that is my opinion. It's a good one to have, something like that to have.
I think, and I notice a lot of like people that I do make a significant portion of their money off social media, that a lot of them like will be really clear. Look, I don't respond to DMs. Like, and I personally don't mind people DMing me. I only have like 3,000 followers. So it's not like it's an unmanageable amount of people. If you're inappropriate, of course, I'll block you. But like,
Yeah.
I don't mind people asking me questions in my DMs. I do, because I have so many planets in my 12th house. I do have a lot of energetic boundaries that I like really hold in place, and I don't necessarily get a ton of like people bothering me, knock on wood. But I do I do think that like, that's certainly necessary for people that are in any sort of care work. And I think that that's also why I'm always an advocate for people to like raise whatever your price is, raise it. If you're feeling like that if you're feeling that feeling that your clients are, even paid clients, are sort of draining you in that way, the most easy solution you will ever have is 20% higher, and you get 20% less of the bullshit. And anytime I'm feeling frustrated, and it's just like, all right, then guess what's gonna happen? We going up with the price. And it makes me feel better. It does. And I feel like that's the other thing too. And I want to kind of segue, and I do want to go back to what you're talking about, friends and family. But since we're kind of on this topic of pricing, I also think that's part of the topic. Like, what is the actual rates for what we're doing? Because I think it's fundamentally really gross, in my opinion, to offer extremely cut rate pricing on our work. You should price to your experience. If you're a fairly new practitioner, that your pricing should reflect that 100%. You should not be charging what somebody with 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years of experience is charging. But you also shouldn't be charging 15, 20, 30% of what they're charging either, because then you're just you're making a mockery of the work that we do. And another thing that I have a real issue with is when people are grossly undercharging or sometimes grossly overcharging, although that's a smaller margin of people. And I find that that's something that I really get irritated by. And I think that there is like definitely there, like if you're reading for people in public at a market, of course you're going to charge less than if you have a private space. But there are people, in the local community of Austin that I know, that are just grossly undercharging for the work. I don't want to call anybody out specifically, but there's a practitioner in Austin that goes around, a very well-known practitioner in Austin, goes around talking about how their work is not mystical or spiritual, how tarot is not mystical or spiritual.
What?
And they're like gaining a lot of traction. There's somebody out here, very well-known person in this community, that is going around telling people that tarot is not intuitive and that it's not mystical and it's not spiritual. I have a friend of mine who's a very well experienced practitioner that accidentally signed up for a class with this person and walked out because they were like, what the fuck are you talking about? And this person's out here not only, I think, grossly undercharging, but also like saying this work is not mystical. And it's like, I guess there's a lid for every pot, but at a certain point, I find that to be really offensive. And that's just how I feel about it.
I mean, I'm in Austin too, but I guess I'm not involved enough in the
I'll tell you later.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm so curious about this. I'm like,
I'll tell you later. I'll tell you later. And yeah, that shit pisses me off. I won't go too far in this tangent, I guess, beyond that, but that's just something I want to say. Is that like, if you're looking to get in this field, yes, price to your experience, but price also to the value of what you're offering, because you could potentially be changing somebody's life, and that does need to have a certain value exchange, I think, associated with it. And that to me is part of the ethics, and sort of why sometimes I get frustrated about how we don't have a lack of, or we do have a lack of governing body, is that it does, there's just, everything can be all over the place when it comes to so many elements of this work, but pricing is one that I get frustrated about for sure.
That is something that I have such a difficult time with.
Really? Do you want to share more about that?
Well, you know how I know I undercharge.
Okay, sure.
I know I do.
I mean, I haven't looked at your pricing in a while. I will be honest with you. I've never looked at it and been like, oh my God, like this is grossly undervalued. So
I do. I feel like I do. I feel
Okay.
like.
I mean, if you're feeling like that, I would argue you probably are. Again, have not seen your pricing lately. So can't speak to it directly. Um, we don't necessarily have to get into this on camera. If you want to, certainly something we could talk about. I definitely like am a sounding board for these things. So if you ever want to have a private conversation about it, we certainly can. But I sort of like, I always advocate for people to charge just a little bit more. That's just kind of what I think.
Yeah.
But I also think, understand the hesitancies around it too.
Yeah, it's well, my thought, my like I mentioned, really wanting to help people, and
Yeah,
that is such a big, I genuinely really, really do.
of course. And I have a sliding scale, just so everybody knows. I do have I do offer sliding scale, and I have a very generous policy around who qualifies. So that's the way I personally approach it, just to kind of give that context.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is wonderful to, to offer that. I offer things like payment plans, things like that, where it's,
Yes.
and things of that nature. I try to do something kind of similar, but I suppose maybe a perspective shift on my end is needed, but it's like, I feel like for me anyway, the higher you price, even if what you do is worth more, and I do think that what I do is,
I'm positive that it is.
it's like you may become out of reach to people who need it, who need the help.
Yes. And
And
that's where the sliding scale for me comes in to
that
be
that makes
important.
that makes
My
sense.
sliding scale is quite literally 50% off. So, I mean, I make it very, and I'm surprised by how infrequently it is utilized. Sometimes I have to remind certain clients whose background I somewhat know about, people that are like in more service oriented professions, teachers, social workers. I'm always like, hey, don't forget, use
Yep.
this code. Like, I think because there is a broad spectrum of people I work with, and sometimes the people I work with are quite wealthy. I do want to make sure that like I am
Accessible.
meeting those standards, but also not alienating anybody that really does value the work and appreciates that it's, yeah. So I think that's where I've come to a resting point with it. And I want to be really clear. I'm talking about people that are charging like 30, 40, $50 for hours worth of work.
Yeah.
That's where I get really, really pissy, unless they're at a market and they're sitting in a loud fucking bar or something. Like, but yeah, if you're gonna be like privately having a conversation with someone for 30, 40, $50, you're not honoring the value of this work, in my opinion, unless there's some sort of other exchange. Like if it's a dear friend of yours, or if it's somebody who truly can only afford that amount, then that's a different conversation. But if somebody's making $500,000 a year and they're only paying you $50 for an hour of your time, we need to have a talk. And that's my perspective on it.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, that does make sense.
Um, but yeah, I think that kind of brings us to, I think, something that you had said had some thoughts on, which is like, what are the ethics of people you have personal relationships with, or clients that become someone that you have a personal relationship with?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah. How do you approach that? When friends, family want you
Yeah.
to read for them, do you have any boundaries that you put in place for yourself, for them, perhaps? Is there anybody, and you don't have to name names, but is there anybody that you're like, I can't read for this person?
That's a good question. I think at this point, at this moment, no. Um, at this moment, there's nobody in my life that I would absolutely say firmly no to, that I can think of off the top of my head. There are certain people in my life I think are not interested. Like I've never read for my father, for instance, but if he wanted to, I probably would. He just doesn't have any interest. I have had to have some boundaries. I don't mind to call her out. I'll say it. My mom has sometimes wanted me to read for people, but I know that she's had an agenda behind it. And I have done it and I have taken her money to do it, but I've been like, I'm not going to promote your agenda, Cindy. Like, this is going to be an authentic experience of a reading. I will take your money, woman, but you're not going to be able to like influence what I'm doing. Now, that was only in one specific situation that I can think of. But yeah, I think there's nobody in my life that I would say a firm no to. Um, there are a lot of people in my life who I would require to make a significant payment. They would not have to pay the full fee, but they would not be paying much. They would get, 25% off, just like a subscriber would. So yes, there are certain people in my life that, yeah, sure, I'll give you a reading, but you're gonna be treated like a normal client. And so that does alienate a lot of people in my life, that probably, but there are certainly people in my life who take like that are close people to me, that see what I offer as a service and respect what I offer as a service, and we treat that as, we keep things fairly separate. That also, overlaps with me. I do have a substantial portion of my income comes from clients that I see with some regularity throughout the year, sometimes as much as once a month. Sometimes I have certain clients that I consult to, every other week. So that becomes quite intimate, of course, because some of these clients I've seen for, this point, 4 or 5 years. So, and then there are some clients that are family members of friends of mine.
Yeah.
And mothers, siblings, of friends of mine, and spouses of friends of mine. So in those situations, again, I just have a tight confidentiality, which doesn't get breached, and they know that, and I know that, and everybody knows that. And I will sometimes be like, okay, this is interesting because like there's an overlap between something I saw and something. I'll give them like sometimes little nuggets of info, but I won't say anything too personal to the point that it's revealing anything that is proprietary. I might be like, oh, it's weird because like your sister got this card too last month or whatever. But I won't, if they want to have a conversation about what that is about, then they can have it privately between them.
Yeah.
And so yes, but I will say, because word of mouth is so important, there is a lot of people in my life that have intimate relationships with one another. And unless they invite the other person to come to the session with them, which they are welcome to do, and sometimes they do, then it becomes completely confidential, as though, any other situation.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah. And a lot of times that, this happens the most, I would say, when I have in heterosexual couples, well, sometimes in queer couples too, but I will say mostly heterosexual couples, when I've been reading a long time for the wife and
Yeah.
she's convinced her husband to get a reading. Occasionally I'll have a reading privately with the husband. A lot of times either the husband wants the wife to sit in, or it just is easier for them to be together so they can discuss it, or she can help him make sense of it. So I will say a lot of times in those situations, the individual's getting a reading, but their spouse is present.
Yeah. 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 And it's, do you ever find that when there are two people present, that there are things that you want to say, but you get the feeling from that it's not a good idea to say it with, do you know what I'm trying to?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, of course, yes, but it doesn't happen that often. But I want to say I'm not really sure why that is, because sometimes I think the information I'm receiving is tailored to the situation. And so it probably would be a different reading if they weren't present, but I'm not getting that because I'm only getting what I'm supposed to give in that moment. So I don't typically get a lot of information that is irrelevant, and the other person being present in the room might just make that piece of information irrelevant. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. I
Um,
was curious about.
yeah, I think that's just how it manifests for me. I will say earlier in my career, it did happen more frequently. Now, something feels like it shifted where I have a lot of trust that the circumstances under which the reading is taking place are the exact circumstances that should be taking place, and that all information that I'm receiving is relevant and anything I'm not receiving is irrelevant. So I don't hold back on things. Um, especially when I'm working specifically in the Akashic records, I'm not really giving my personal assessment of anything.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of putting words to what I'm being given. So I don't filter that at all.
Yeah.
I just give it as though I'm receiving it. So in that situation, I would say actually that happens very rarely. In that style of reading, it happens very infrequently, if not really, doesn't really happen. That there's something I'm getting that I can't give.
Well, that's good that it that it doesn't
So
happen.
how do you approach like people approaching you that you have personal relationships with, or even like when you have a long-term ongoing relationship with someone, how do you approach kind of keeping it pure, like keeping the word pure?
Well, we'll start with the people that I know thing. I I'm very, very blunt with the people that I know. I'm like, okay, in this situation, you are a client.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I'm happy to, because I know you, right? Like I'm obviously going to do a discount or something because I know you, right? Or
Right.
I'm gonna hook you up like that, but you are a client. I'm going to put our relationship in a fucking box.
Yeah, yeah, same.
And
Yeah,
I'm
same.
like, and I'm like, because you're a client and I'm, reading for you. I might not seem like the same. I might feel different to you. And,
Yeah,
and I was like, I don't want you to take offense. I was like, if you
yeah,
feel, if you feel like this is going to bother you or it's going to be hard for you, I was like, because this is the only way that I can do it is to put our relationship in a box.
same. Yeah, I think that's the only way to do it. I mean, if somebody else has a different strategy, I'm willing to hear it, but I don't know how else anything else would work.
Yeah, I don't think it does. I mean, personally, from it, because earlier on, and it's one thing, reading for friends and family, and they're, let's say, not paying you. It's just, you're just doing something for them. That's a whole other
Yeah,
thing.
for
But
sure.
there is an exchange of money here. You are,
Yeah,
you know,
they deserve that respect. They
yeah,
deserve that respect that you would give to any other paying client. And then also I think the third element of that is like the tool itself deserves that respect as well. And the craft itself deserves that respect, which is why I have certain boundaries where at a certain point in the night, maybe I won't read anymore. Or I will be like, sure, I'll pull some cards, but you got to realize I've had like a few drinks,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah,
And I personally don't think it changes my ability to like do the work, but I kind of give someone that disclaimer. And in that situation, I'm very unlikely to exchange money. It would be a rare situation. Maybe I would. I'm not saying I wouldn't, but it would be very rare that I would be doing it in a professional sense, like in that way. But yeah, I think that yeah, that's how I feel about it too.
yeah, and yeah, that's kind of the way that I've just tried to approach that angle of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So when the ongoing relationships with clients, like, does that, because I think for me, that's how I treat ongoing relationships with clients too. Like, I'm interested and invested in your personal life, and I feel a certain kinship for certain people that is friendly, um, and very warm. And there's going to be times when my humanity is exposed, when their humanity is exposed, and we're going to treat each other obviously like such. But yes, I do need to handle those relationships with boundaries as well. And if there's any blurring of that, then it does sometimes need to be reassessed. And rarely have I ever dismissed a client for that reason. And I'm not gonna lie, I have different standards for different clients because of different energies, and I think that's
Sure.
fair
Yeah.
because vibes. Like, I have a client who is an older lady, and we have a very close relationship, and we at the end of the call will often say, love ya, bye. And I would never do that with like pretty much anybody else, but with her in particular, it's I know that it's fine. And anytime we've had to have discussions or anything about money, we always are like, this is just the business part, and we both acknowledge that. And she goes, oh, she even has this little joke where she goes, it's just like they say in the mafia, it's just business. And then we have the little money conversation, and then it's done. And that is, I think, one of the healthier, like most of my relationships with my clients are very healthy, but like that is one of my, I guess, again, I don't have favorites, but it is a very close relationship to my heart. And therefore, I don't mind expressing that in the words that I have, which is to say that I do love her,
Yeah.
in a very appropriate way. And I receive that back from her. I would never do that with like anybody else, though.
No, I understand. Yeah, well, I mean, just like in regular life, there are certain people that we vibe very well with, certain people that, some people, we're more neutral with, some people we may not vibe with as much. And I think the same thing can be translated over with
Yeah,
clients.
1000%.
And I have to say, quite honestly, some of my very best friends started out as clients.
Yeah, yeah. I have some really close relationships with people that started as clients. I don't know that that would happen again at this stage in my career, though. I'll be very transparent about that. I think things have evolved to the point that I don't know that I would be as open to having some of the relationships that I do with some of my earlier clients. And I don't know. I mean, I guess can't say never say never. Um, but it is something that I think has probably shifted in me that would make that less possible right now than it was, 5 years ago.
Yeah, and yeah,
That's
I
for me personally. I'm not saying about anybody else. I'm just speaking
no,
to me personally.
I was gonna say I kind of yeah, I'm kind of, I guess, perhaps in a similar place. Um, that way. But I mean, that the people that have, because truly some of my very best friends did start out
Yeah,
as clients, and it wasn't really like discussed, right? Like, oh, we're friends now. But it just kind of evolves that way, and it doesn't happen with everybody, but it did with these.
sure. No, and you can't. I wouldn't say it would be inappropriate, in my opinion, to be like, I can't be your friend
Yeah,
because of this. Like, that would also be an extreme that would be weird. And
yeah,
I have clients that I've had really long term relationships with, that I've had personal outings with, that I've gone and done things with that have been unrelated to the work, and have been, really pleasant and lovely, and such an important part of life. Things don't, and boundaries are but not meant to be rigid either. They're meant to be flexible, and that's the purpose of them. That's why they're useful. But I think it's interesting. I kind of want to segue. Do you mind if I segue into like one last thing I want to talk about, or just a thing that I kind of came up in my mind? I think this is actually something that we can speak to authentically because we've done this for each other. How do you feel about reading for other practitioners?
oh, I mean, I love it.
Me
um,
too. I love it. Yes.
I love it, and I love getting readings from other practitioners.
Same. Obviously, yeah, same. I would be very, very, very sad if I was no longer able to give readings from other practitioners.
Yeah, because there's always something to be learned from somebody else's, experience, how they do things, perspectives because of their perspective of what they're reading, whatever that might be. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say that is the space that I am most amenable to trades with. It is in I love to do a service exchange. Not to say I wouldn't pay another practitioner. Of course, I absolutely would. I'd absolutely have. But I love being able to trade with people. If we both feel on the same page and it feels like a right energy exchange. I think that is, I would say the two spaces that I'm most amenable to like doing service exchanges with are other practitioners or other artists. I is where I oftentimes find myself, like, I have a close friend who I share a studio with as a painter. I'm like, okay, you paint this piece of art for me, and then I will do, like, pretty much every year she does a piece of art for me, and then I do a big year ahead reading with her and her best friend, and it's like this big intense like evening long experience, and we do an exchange about that pretty much every year. So every year I know I'm getting like a little art treat, like, kind of, it's kind of like, also we're really close friends, so it's like a Christmas present to each other too, so it's probably more extreme than I would do with other people, but it's like we get to have this like
Yeah.
beautiful little, and then it's one last person I'm like have to think about getting something for Christmas for, because it's like, oh, we'll just do that. And so it's just nice to have that ability to like exchange things with people. But I think, there's kind of in this conversation of like ethics and boundaries and the way other people are running their practice. It's also an inside look, without having to be super nosy or like it's also, I think, a really interesting way to like just, oh, this is how this person runs their practice. Like, and I'm just, I get to kind of get that insight in an authentic way. that feels, interesting, because it is always what's cool. Oh my God, my cat's biting me again. What's cool about our work and the lack of the governing body, because there's so many benefits to it too. We talked a lot about the disadvantages of having a lack of governing ethical body, but some of the advantages are we all get to decide how we run our own practices. And I think that there's something really lovely about that as well, that I would be remiss to lose if we were to somehow get some sort of regulatory system.
Yeah. Yeah. It does kind of give people the freedom and the flexibility to run them. And I think, like you were talking about before, that's where the discernment comes in, trying to figure out whose vibe, whose way they, however it is they appear to run their practice, if it seems good to you or whoever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, like, I had a friend come to me this weekend and talk to me about some things that occurred in a coaching container that they were in. And the coaching space is somewhat different. There's a lot of overlapping, and there's a lot of unregulation over there too. That was really harmful to them. And it really pissed me the fuck off, because it's like, so much, I think, harm reduction is practiced by people like you and I, who are willing to have these thoughtful conversations and hold each other accountable and talk about these things. And I feel like we're doing so much double work, because we're doing the harm reduction on the front end, but then we're also doing so much repair work on the back end from people who have been burned through the shit. And that's just, I don't know, the rub of it. Like, that's where I get, and that's where I think the care piece that you spoke to so eloquently in this session has really been where maybe that piece comes in for me, is like, I'm so protective of people. Like, I don't want this work in any way, whether it's astrology, tarot, or any sort of spiritual work, even in like spaces I have no room to speak yoga or whatever, like this larger umbrella of spiritual work. I just think we have to be protective of it, because if the well gets too poisoned, the backlash to that is going to be severe, and it will affect all of us. And every single person who preaches ethics in this way, to the point that people are harmed, puts a dent in that. And that's where I think these conversations are so essential and so important, and why I'm so grateful that people before me were having these public conversations, so that I could, or these public, podcast things that I could learn from, because I do think that, like, we also have to understand the ebbs and flows. And to your point, we experienced a very large ebb in 2020 to this world that we're in. The natural world will bring that flow, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. We experience a very large flow. The natural world will bring that ebb back. And I think the strong will survive, but my concern is many pronged, of like, how many people have to get hurt before they're burned and they completely turn against all of us, and how many times does a charlatan have to fuck people over before there is some sort of backlash that is like really fucked, and we maybe can't operate as publicly and as freely and as we've been able to in our careers up to this point. Does that make sense? Or I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but I also feel like I'm touching on something important.
No, you are yes, you are touching on something important. And even though there's not like, I have like my own little code, ethical code.
Same.
But the first thing really is, and I'm not a fucking doctor, but it is, first, do no harm.
Yeah.
That really,
Mine's slightly different. It's do no harm, but take no shit, but it's there. Vibes the same.
yeah, it's, and again, that requires everybody kind of being on the same page. But I hope the people that are serious about this do kind of have something similar at the top.
Right.
Maybe not exactly the same, but something similar, because it really, when people come for help or guidance or whatever, there is a responsibility that that one has to deliver whatever guidance, whatever they see, and through whatever modality that they use, in a helpful way, in a honest way, in a and
With
taking
integrity.
yes, with integrity. Yes.
Yeah, and I would argue that there's a responsibility on both sides. There's responsibility,
Yep.
obviously, of the practitioner. There's also the responsibility of the consumer. And I do think both of those things, the discernment piece is strong with that. I want to come back to the do no harm piece, because I do think that it is a little bit impossible to
It is.
do no harm in this space, and when I don't say this at the beginning of all my sessions, perhaps I should, but in my timeline jumping coaching containers, because those are very transformative and therefore very prickly, I always start each container off by saying this is a safer space. It's not a safe space. I don't want to judge safety for somebody else, so it's a safer space. And then I encourage you to let me know if I'm infringing upon your autonomy in some way, or you're not feeling good about this interaction or this dynamic. But inevitably, in this work that we do, at some point someone is going to be disappointed. And so I'm working really hard on like the mindset of like, people are allowed to be disappointed with me, and I'm also allowed to be disappointing, and both of those things are okay. Like, they're not great, they're not desirable, we want to try to avoid them if possible, but also they're fine and they're not the end of the world. And I think that that's something that I take really seriously, of like, sometimes, like, as a person who has certain needs because of like my brain, or I don't even really have a brain, I don't think it's just like a bunch of Skittles up there and they've gone really sour. So like, whatever the Skittles want to do on a daily basis, sometimes I have to reschedule appointments. Sometimes I try to keep it at a minimum, but sometimes I have to. So I have a really, especially with my like long-term clients, I have a really like open door policy of like, if you're not feeling it, you let me know. If for whatever reason I really can't, I will let you know as well, and we'll just reschedule. If you don't show up at all and you don't tell me at all, that's a different thing. But if you even 5 minutes before, 2 minutes before, 5 minutes after, even, you're like, I'm just not up for it today, I will not take that personally, because energy work is not something I think can be forced
Yeah.
in an appropriate way. And so there's all of this sort of, again, it has to be, each of us have to come to our own code of ethics. I try my best to explain to clients what those are up front. And in that sense, I'm really grateful that I'm able to have the freedom to set my own standards. But and then if clients don't like it, then it's also fine that I'm not the practitioner for them. Not everyone's going to be the person that, wants to work with me, and that's totally fine. But I think that there's just like this, yeah, I don't know. This is like a conversation that has so many nuances that we could explore forever, but I think it's an important one that, like, to your initial point, is grossly discussed. And I don't really know why, because I think we would all feel better as practitioners if we were having these conversations with each other more regularly.
Yeah, seriously. And I even think the clients or potential clients, it might even, oh, did I freeze or something? Did I froze?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if it's you or me. I'm having some really gnarly Mercury retrogradisms around here. Is it coming? It's coming through more clearly on my end. I do have a cat being really inappropriate. Hey, can you not do that, Kimberly? I think I'm slowly losing control around here.
Oh, it's okay. We'll kind of wrap this up then. I do think that even like these conversations just being had, right? Potential clients or whatever, kind of seeing people talk about this.
Yeah.
Could
Yes.
even help with the discernment of who to go with, or you know what I mean? Like,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, to my larger point of like, there's a lid for every pot, and that I'm okay with not being the practitioner that everyone wants to go with. And as much as I was like kind of expressing my emotions around, or my feelings around, or my thoughts around, somebody espousing a belief that tarot is not mystical or not intuitive, or whatever this person is, whatever their belief system is, they have the right to believe that. And if certain clients vibe with that more and they're getting something out of it, who am I to say, that that's inappropriate? I guess. I think I'm of a many minds about that, but I do think there is a lid for every pot. If you believe that tarot is not an intuitive mystical practice, I'm probably not the witch for you. And I think that's okay,
that is okay, because the
and
people that need to find us, I think, do.
yeah, I agree. And I'm really grateful, like I said, to be able to do this work, because I know that I've never been satisfied with anything else in the way that I'm satisfied with the way that this work exists in my life. And it is so wonderful to like see the changes that happen in people's lives and to like get those like little notes of feedback. And like it does feel really wonderful to help people with these tools, and I'm deeply grateful for those opportunities and to be able to monetize it in a way that supports me. And so that's where I talked about the money being the boundary and like this being a job, and I feel very strongly and convicted in all of those things. But it's a job that I'm very grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for the community also that comes along with it. And when I see people espousing things that I think are either directly in contradiction with my belief system, or I think sometimes a gross misuse of some of these tools, I also just use my discernment and I just like migrate away from them. You know, I think that's, I kind of want to live in the way that like I want my clients to live, where it's like, if something doesn't feel right or good to you, then just like, there's a lot of other people out there talking about the same thing with different contexts. So, you know, move on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh,
Well,
look at this sweet little girl. She's being so sweet.
yeah.
She was being real bad earlier. She says she's sorry, guys, for disrupting our call earlier. Are you sorry? She's not sorry. That's not true. She's not sorry at all. This is the face of an unrepentant feline.
Well, I guess on that note, we'll go ahead and head off, but share where you can be found.
Yeah, I can be found at macjaggertarot.com. That is the easiest way to get in touch with me directly. I'm also on Instagram and only Instagram. That is my only social media. And of course, it's Mak Jagger Tarot. There's no C in Mac, and it's just MAK. And that's really the two main places where I can be found
And I will
at
put,
this moment.
okay.
One day I'll be going to the YouTube ranks, hopefully, and the podcasting ranks, hopefully. Not hopefully, I will be. It was just, you know, Skittles for brains. So we're working on it.
And I will put the links below where people can click and find you and everything.
Yes, please. Thank you.
And thank you so much for being here, for having this discussion.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me to have this discussion, and thank you for inviting me to, you know, continue our talk the other day with Brandy. That was a lot of fun. So yeah, I hope to be invited back to your channel sometime soon.
Anytime.
All right, bye.
I'll see y'all later.